So I thought we'd go around the room and introduce ourselves and say what the reason why you chose this workshop. What is it that you want to talk about, and your response to the brief description that I wrote for this workshop. Hi, come on in. There should be, there's more chairs. So anyway, I'll start off and I'll say, my name is Sabeel, and I'm a cultural anthropologist at the University of New Mexico. Been here in New Mexico for 19 years, and as long as I've lived in any place ever. Come on in.
Here, you can sit right here.
There's more chairs.
There's some more chairs over here. You can take this in the back there.
Okay.
I'll just
Where
grab
else
a
do you
chair.
live besides Albuquerque?
Back there.
Colombia, South America, Nicaragua, Mexico, Seattle, San Francisco, lots of places. So all around. I was born in New York City, but back in the... So
Here, you can go back there.
Okay, there you go.
I'm Jewish, and I was raised a Zionist by people who survived the Holocaust and who were refugees from Eastern Europe. And so my early childhood was composed of my brother, myself, and the state of Israel sitting at my grandmother's table at all times. And I was raised by people who were deeply traumatized by their lives and by the treatment that they had or their relatives had received. I went to Israel for my bar mitzvah and lived there for 3 months when I was 12 or 13 years old. And so my initial movement towards a critical view of the state of Israel and of Zionism occurred when I started working in Latin America. And I started working in Nicaragua immediately following the victory of the Frente Sandinista in 1979. And the moment that I'll share with you in which my world changed was I was visiting a Red Cross hospital in the city of Esteli, a small city in northern Nicaragua. The state of Israel was the last country to sell weapons to the Somoza dictatorship. This is a well-known and well-documented fact. And I walked into this Red Cross hospital, which had been bombed and destroyed, and I found shell casings with Hebrew letters. And that was the moment that my world sort of spun around, and I saw my grandmother and I saw my family members and sort of collapsed on the ground, and Nicaraguan children came over and tried to help me. Ever since then, I've been on a long path that the speaker Miko Poulet describes. It's a very difficult road. Very, very difficult road, but it's been a really important one for me. I returned after 41 years to Palestine in 2011 to co-lead a field school that was composed of 8 undergraduates and 9 graduate students from the departments of anthropology and American studies at UNM, and the name of the field school was Technologies of Occupation. And so that was the sort of most important sort of return that I've ever had in my life, and in which I was able finally to confront perhaps the deepest layers at which Zionism had penetrated my own character and had imbued my relationships with my family with a particular sort of ideological content. And so, anyway, that's a little bit of my story, and I now consider the Middle East to be part of my research area, and I'm going to give a talk at the American University of Beirut next week, so I'll be in Lebanon starting October 6th. So I know that was kind of long, but anyways, if you want to go around the room and just say why you feel like this particular workshop spoke to you, what it is that you'd like to accomplish if you can in this short time. Go ahead.
I'm Ann Coburn. I'm from Berkeley, California, and I don't know, your topic speaks to me on so many levels of trying to understand the Zionist background. Not in my own life, I'm an Episcopal priest, but in the lives of my family and in many of their relationships and a number of my friends, and how to speak that narrative. So.
I'm Dean Lewis, and I'm a retired Presbyterian minister. I spent much of my time in the last 20 years with the nation of Cuba. So, and the Presbyterian church down there. But my association with this issue began in the 70s when I was running the social policies development system for the National Presbyterian Church. And we did a major study on the whole Middle East situation, during which I got caught in Cairo when the Yom Kippur War broke out.
Oh, wow.
And spent 13 days trying to get out. And watching the damned American spy planes go over and feed all the stuff to the Israelis, that was enough to cap it for me, although I had my instincts already. So I've been involved in that, and curious always to try to think about how the homeland for the Jewish people got transformed into a Zionist state.
Yeah.
No.
Can you just move your chairs over, please? Everybody move your chairs
No. Let's keep going around the room, introducing ourselves and talking about our stakes in this.
Yeah, can you move your chair over?
I'm gonna go this way instead. I'm gonna go this way.
Yeah, because we want those to have access. Just go.
Can we suggest that we not go around the room?
Yeah, it's gonna take too long.
It's gonna take quite a
All
while.
right.
Yeah, too long.
Well, then if we don't do that, then maybe when you first say something, participate, then you can.
Yes, that's a good idea.
So what I was thinking would help organize the discussion is to separate three threads, I think, that everyone probably recognizes, at least implicitly, are present in the relationship between Judaism and this nationalism that we call Zionism. Now, I've talked in the past about where Zionism comes from historically, and I rooted in the breakup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the end of the 19th century. And the equation that was congealed in the First World War between nation, language, state, identity, and in many cases race. So that's something that I've talked about previously. And then I contrast it with the development of nationalism in the Arab world, which was founded on the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, which was a very different kind of national movement and envisioned something called the Arab nation, which included, of course, Palestine and Lebanon, and all of these countries that came into existence after the influence of the English or British and French colonialism. But what I think for our particular topic today, I think is important, is three threads that Jeff Halper and I talked about yesterday that I think are really interesting to distinguish. Number one, the historical relationship, regardless of whether King David existed or not, but there is a historical relationship between Jewish people and the land of Palestine. And there have been Jewish people living in the land of Palestine for a very long time, before the 19th century, before the 18th century, and in the last 2,000 years. So that's one thing. The second thread, I think, is the idea that Jews or a Jewish government should rule the state of a country in Palestine, which is very different than the idea that Jewish people live in Palestine. So the idea that there should be a government in Palestine that is Jewish and that rules a Jewish state in Palestine. And third of all, the concept that there should be the elimination of people who are not Jewish people in the land of Palestine. So these are all three separate things. And the difference between the last two was brought home to me recently when I was reading a biography of a Palestinian leader named George Habash, who was the founder of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. And he was a Palestinian Christian, Greek Orthodox from what's now Israel is called Lod, but the Palestinians called Lida. And it's in 48, it's not in the West Bank. And he and his family were from there. And in his early declarations, he really made the distinction. He said, it's one thing that they wanted to establish a Jewish government and a Jewish state in Palestine. That's one thing. But the fact that they also wanted to drive out the Arab people of Palestine is another thing. And so those three things seem to me to be all really important kinds of ways of taking the presence of Jewish people in Palestine and acknowledging that historic presence and separating it from these two other issues. So that's one thing that people might want to comment on. Another thing, of course, is the history of Zionism in the United States, which I've been trying to figure out more and more about. Someone, it's over there. Could you hand me that package of stuff right in front of you? I don't know how this happened, but someone sent me a package, they didn't say who they were, from something called the Council for Judaism, which I had never heard of before. Well, it got sent to me out of the blue, and there was no one's name on it. And there were a number of different articles. It's very interesting, like someone's got my number or something. And the articles basically trace this group's existence. And it's, many of you may be familiar that there are some ultra-Orthodox groups that rejected Zionism because they felt that a state in Palestine was illegitimate unless it had been, or a Jewish state, unless it had been established by the Messiah. Well, that many people are familiar with. But there was also a significant, if not dominant, trend in Reform Judaism, not ultra-Orthodox, but in Reform Judaism in the United States, starting in the 1930s and 40s, that rejected the idea of tying Judaism to a nation state, that rejected the idea that that Jewish people were composed a national group that should have a state of its own, and that instead saw Jewish people as members of whatever countries that they lived in, just like there are people in the United States who are atheists, people in the United States who are Christians, people in the United States who are Muslims or Hindus, but whose affiliation nationally is to their country, the United States, or whatever country in the world, Argentina, Turkey, whatever place, and that Jewish people are a religion, a people, but who are part of nation states throughout the world. And the idea of creating a Jewish state itself is deeply problematic. And I think that's an area of discussion. I know that Jeff and I just discussed that yesterday, and probably to some extent we have some disagreements about it. But to me, that has been one of the most important things that I have been trying to grapple with, is that the idea of a Jewish state might not be such a great idea. Now, at the same time, when I think that to myself, immediately 4 or 5 of my deceased relatives immediately are on my shoulders saying, basically, what the hell should we have done then at the end of the Second World War? What the hell should we have done? What should have occurred? What's a better idea, Les? Since you're so smart, you know? Which is how my relatives would have talked to me. Mr. Smartass, give us another solution.
New
at
York.
the end of the Second World War. Well, that's where my relatives went. And it is too late now, but it's worthy of consideration, is if we're going to say that the idea of a Jewish state is a bad idea, because anytime you take a country and you say one group, whether it's an ethnic group or a religious group, defines that state, defines the nature of that state, and somehow citizenship in that state is predicated, full citizenship upon belonging to that group, and everyone else is a minority within that state. That, to me, is as an anthropologist, deeply problematic. And what I saw, you know, in Latin America, and that's where I do my work, is that in the post-World War II period, you have the departure from that idea. So Colombia, which is where my wife is from and where I go all the time, Colombia was an officially Catholic country until 1950-something. And then they said, no, that's not what we're going to do anymore, right? It's not an officially Catholic country, it's a secular country. Maybe most people here are Catholic, but that's not how we define Colombian nationality, as also participating or being members of a particular religious or ethnic group. So in the world at large, that's an idea that seems to have been abandoned in many places or seriously diluted. And so that then also reflects back on the notion of, is that a good idea to have a Jewish state that prioritizes and enshrines one group as being more citizens than any other group because they're members of that group? So anyway, now I'd like to open it up for discussion again.
So my name is Nahum Wardlab, Rabbi from Santa Fe. And I'm really sympathetic to what you said. And I want to sort of complexify it by saying I agree that it's problematic as a Jewish state. And yet, and at the same time, I honor that this people, this Jewish people, unlike Christians, unlike Muslims, have understood themselves to be a people, that they've got a vocation to be a people. You know, the reason they were given a land, I'm not arguing against you, I'm just putting this out. The reason they were given a land in the biblical narrative is because the way that they were to express themselves was to be able to form a society as an alternative to societies around themselves. You know, and so I think that we need to both deal with the terrible injustice that is being done by a Jewish state, and at the same time need to deal with, here's a people whose vocation is to be a people. Like Christianity's vocation was, to spread the gospel throughout the world, you know, not to be a specific people, but this people defined itself culturally as a people we need to deal with. So how does this people do that? You know?
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I grew up seeing Christians as other, very much so, and often a hostile other in the background that I was brought up in. And so I've tried my best and I've always challenged all the people that my parents had a rank order of who were the worst, right? So that, you know.
So what was that?
The rank, well, the worst, of course, were Ukrainians and Poles and Lithuanians were the worst. And so there was just a whole rank order of Europeans, right? And Arabs were just completely, and it was always like Miko said, it's the Arabs, right? It wasn't any kind of distinction. So I've tried to challenge that, and I have to tell you that when I went to Bethlehem in 2011, and we were brought there by our Palestinian friends, and we were told the story of the siege of the Church of the Nativity, and how the bodies of dead people were kept in there. I had a moment, y'all. I had a moment that I never thought I would ever have, and I felt like I walked a little with Jesus.
Felt like you did what?
Walked a little bit with Jesus, just a little bit, and sort of thought, if the idea here is love your neighbor as yourself, and peace as a deep concept, this guy is still real ahead of his time. This is some rabbi, you know. And so I never imagined I would ever feel that way in my life. And so I feel like there is maybe sometimes a Jewish misunderstanding. Yeah, the Gospels are something to spread, but I think there is the notion of the community in Christ. You know, and there's the notion of Christendom as a larger world of Christianity. And I think the same thing exists in Islam. The Ummah, right, is the community in Islam. And maybe it's a different one than at least the versions that we know of in Judaism and that have been so deeply imbued by the history of Zionism. But I don't think that's something to discount either, is that notion of a community. And of maybe a very large community, because there's hundreds of millions of Muslims and hundreds of millions of Christians, but it's not necessarily a concept that's alien there. And so, and those communities span national borders. And I don't know that that is inimical to the idea of a Jewish community or of a Jewish people, that Jewish people are Argentines and they are French and they are Americans and they are Australians and all of these different places. I think, and you know, this would get into some of my recent work, that this again is the overpowering effect of Zionism to say, yeah, but that's just exile. That's just diaspora, and that's second best to being in the land where we all belong. And I want to resist that. This is my country, and I don't have a secondary affiliation except the world, except humanity. But my country is the United States. This is where my family found refuge. This is where, you know, I owe, as a child of refugees, a debt to Native Americans, right, whose lands these were. I don't have a secondary affiliation. And, you know, what was the history of my Hebrew school training? We were being trained for Aliyah. You know, it was a deeply secular, nationalistic agenda. We were being taught Hebrew, so we'd be ready to go, there someday. We were being deeply, deeply indoctrinated in Hebrew school to potentially at any moment become Israelis. And I feel offended by that in some ways as an American. I really do. I think that's a really weird thing to do to people. And obviously, the sequelae of that now are that, Netanyahu comes over to the Congress and he tells us what our policy should be. He tells us what our foreign policy should be. He tells us what we ought to feel about our president. Would any other foreign country be allowed to even mildly do this? What gives this guy the right to do this in our country? And I speak as a Jew of the United States of America, right? I can't believe that that is permitted for this man to show such deep disrespect to our president.
I'd like to make a comment.
Yeah.
I'm Jessica Kimmel. I'm a professor of education at the University of Incarnate Word in San Antonio. I've been to Israel and Palestine 13 times. Each time I've stayed 6 to 8 weeks, and I'm writing a book on Palestinian women. The most impressive thing to me are the time when you were talking about, it just has to do with what I'm going to talk about. It's when the women from Maxam Watch took me out to stand at the borders at 4 in the morning. And it was really an impressive 4 hours to watch them work, because that is peace being done. You have to be Jewish, you have to be able to speak Hebrew, you have to have served in the IDF, and there's one more, you have to be at least 60, I think, to be on this. And they walk up to those those Israeli soldiers, and they confront them head on. I was also in the IDF, I know how you feel, I know what the situation is. They're amazing. There are now 400 of them, and they've let some men in now. It was first all women. But I think this idea of a theocracy messes up all kinds of things. And we don't want Islam to do this on the one hand. As a nation, we're saying they can't establish a theocratic nation, but we want Judaism to do it. It doesn't make sense.
It is deeply problematic. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question, and I as I was sitting here today, in the plenary session, I keep thinking about what's going on in this country right now. As a white person, there is this terror that we are going to become the minority. It's kind of like we have to face up to our demographic reality. And I was thinking that how much, and I'm just wondering if that's not so underlying, and I think we're all kind of touching on it, that demographic fear that Jewish Israelis must fear, and the realities are the realities. The birth rate is higher. There are more Palestinians than there are Jews in Israel and Palestine. So how do you all deal with that? Because I'm thinking we got the same problem.
What is that fear? That fear of the other?
The others will pick on us or not be nice to us or something.
I'm married to a Hispanic. Who are they're
She's
coming, they're
probably
invading.
lovely. Yeah.
I don't see that. And what Nico said, he said, I crossed that border, and I felt that same thing. I looked into the faces of those people that I have been taught are my enemies. I did not see that.
That's right.
And I also, as a child, went to Germany, and I have learned so much. I have to basically say here, my spiritual guide all along has been this woman right here, Linda, who has taught me so much and who has been the person who has shepherded my growth as a person. And without her, and she's always been so far in advance of me. And she was doing this work back in the 90s when I was still sort of, I don't know where, in my thinking. But this necessity that we almost have to confront the other with honesty, and to find that, in fact, they're not the other. So the fear of, quote-unquote, white people in this country is the fear of the invader, right? And the fear of history, right? The fact that, here in New Mexico, the vast majority of Hispanic people, their ancestors are here longer than white people or English-speaking people. And the border moved on them, not, they moving here. And so,
actually, 100 years ago, Jews weren't considered white.
And Jews weren't considered white in this country. Well, that's even before
That's
World War
another
II,
issue, yeah.
right? When Irish as well. There's just, I think that immediately needs to be resisted, the otherization of people that are different than us, and to cross the border, whatever that border is, and say,
How
no.
would you help, I mean, those of you who are Israeli or, how do you, I think I feel responsibility for, as an American,
Yeah.
to help, us through this period too, like, hey, we don't need to fear. I don't know how I would overcome that fear if I were Jewish in Israel.
Well, I'm not
what would
Israeli, so
you,
I don't know.
I don't know how to, phrase my question.
If I could say something. I notice a narrative of victimizing the oppressor, that this is really an important, it's a propaganda thing that, and Nora Ericott wrote something about our nationalism and terrorism. It's in, you can Google it, legitimizing our national, what an American nationalist is. And it's very much white, and it's very much, baseball and all this stuff. So there's this push to then make us feel this concept of demographic threat, when in actuality, we are the dominant culture, we oppress, and we have created these narratives of these enemies in order to keep that balance, which is very much happening in Israel-Palestine too, of course. And just not to buy into it.
Plus, I'm a Judy Bennett, and I'm not really not from anywhere in particular, and I don't have any great, except that I think one of the most helpful experiences that I've ever had is being a minority, being in another country where everybody else looks different. And I spent 35 years in Memphis, and I was there when Martin Luther King was killed, and I was going to a church that was right next door, practically, to the church where he was killed. It was a church where only black people went most of the time, and that's why my husband and I decided going there, because every other church, Catholic, in Memphis that we ever went to was all white, and they were very dull, and they were all the same. And we wondered, this town is mostly black. Where did they all go? Well, they would go to the other places, and so this little church was actually integrated. And that's where the Paulists came, and that's where they did so much with integration and people came to that church. They were like renegades from their white families. They knew this was a place of freedom, and they were being released from their generations of being told that, don't touch black people. I taught in a school where they integrated the school, and the kids said, my mom said, don't touch any of those people. That kind of crap. But the best feeling is to be where you suddenly realize you are, I think that's a very learning experience. You're the minority, and yet nobody's even killed you yet.
Yeah, there you go.
And you learn. And I really think we all have these histories, and some of them are very tight histories, and some of them are like mine, very loose history. But our job is to not to throw it away, not to denigrate it, but to outgrow it, to grow with it, with what's good, and cast off what's
Question over here. Yes. He's had his hand up since the beginning.
Thank you. I would like to interject a little different touch. I come from Wisconsin. I live out in the boonies in a retirement settlement. It would be characterized in WASP society as redneck. But I've been very intimately involved for the last 7 years with the Palestinian-Israeli situation. And what I see happening now, and it was this morning very dramatic, I see a tipping point coming in American consciousness. And I'm very concerned that as a Christian, formerly Presbyterian clergyman, now with the spiritual home in the Orthodox faith, that as this tipping point comes, there will no longer be a distinction made in mass American society between Zionism and Judaism, and therefore, as Johan Gultam, the father of peace studies from Norway, says, with his inimitable Norwegian accent, I think America going to wake up to the fact that the dog's tail is trying to wag the dog. And you know, it's a very big dog. It's a little pit bullish. And I'm afraid that when they wake up, we're going to have terrible anti-Semitism in the United States.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned that we make the distinction between Zionism and Judaism. Some of you people here in the Jewish community stand in the most noble tradition of Jewish spirituality and human rights. But there would be no distinction, and this is personal. My daughter married a Jewish man, he wasn't practicing, so I just came from the bar mitzvah of my grandson. So my grandson is a Jew, and he could suffer brutally, because I know how much latent fanaticism there is in our country.
I think that's really sobering. Yeah, Lynn.
I just wanted to say quickly, it's not about the Jewish people, right? This is not about the Jewish people.
Yeah.
This is my personal opinion. This is about an oppression of Palestinian people that we're all cooperating in as American citizens and through the Empire of America, and in other contexts, which historically we don't have to go into. But, you know, just like the civil rights movement wasn't about, you know, comforting the feelings of white people. It was about providing justice for people of color in this country. And I believe that this is the same situation. And it's true that Jewish people have a lot of homework to do, that we have to do among ourselves. We have to strengthen each other. We have to get back to basic values. Christian community has a lot of work to do.
Amen.
The Muslim community is right now a target of vicious anti-Muslim experiences. And so I think we all need to ask, how do we create a community of solidarity for justice and the values that we all share? So yes, we have a lot of feelings to work through, but I would like to say that this is not about us. This is about the suffering of a people living under occupation.
Absolutely.
But if I can interject one thing, Netanyahu, when he comes to speak before Congress, or when he speaks in general before the UN, speaks in the name of the Jewish people.
He does.
He doesn't speak in the name of Israel. I'm the Prime Minister of Israel, I have a country, and I represent my citizens. No. He speaks in the name of the Jewish people. And the American Jewish community accepts that. That's the problem.
Amen.
And you can't, and I think Al's right, it's going to slide into anti-Semitism, because Israel is confusing the American Jewish, or Jewish in general, Israeli distinctions. And it's up to American Jews, I think Jews all over the diaspora, to say, no, Israel is a country, we wish it well, we're not Israelis, and you don't represent us. And you can't have an occupation and do what you're doing and implicate us. Because in fact, that actually puts the Jews in the world in jeopardy. Because it makes the Jews responsible. But the problem with the organized Jewish community is accepting that and going along with that, and then they turn around and say, well, why are you blaming us for what Israel's doing in the occupation? Because Israel is doing that in your name. So the American Jews have got to distance themselves from Israel, and they can wish it well and has Jewish elements to it, but it's not Jewish. Israel is a country, and it's not the Jewish people.
That distinction is hard for a non-Jew to really capture.
Well,
I don't understand that. You just explained something I never really thought about.
And it's particularly difficult when the Zionist movement has insisted on identifying Israel as a Jewish state.
Yes.
That's what makes it difficult.
Well, and any criticism of Zionism is a criticism of Judaism.
That's
Judaism.
what-
That's
So-
the
This is
distinction
by
that needs to be
design.
That's
broken.
because of this identification. I can criticize the policies of Russia without being accused of being anti-Orthodox. But I cannot criticize the policies of Israel without being accused of being anti-Semitic. Why? Because they have themselves accepted the definition of themselves as a Jewish state. not as a state, but as a Jewish state. And I think Peled was exactly right. Until that problem is solved and Israel becomes a secular democracy, it's still going to be the confusion. I think Alexi's right. It's one of the real problems we're going to be facing as this mood in America begins to shift, which I think is happening also. But until people can sort out this problem, which is not created by us, it was created by the Zionists and their insistence that it is a Jewish state, not just simply a state.
Well, let's make a distinction here then. What is Zionism as opposed to what is Judaism? I mean, I think that's part of this workshop.
Or what is
Could you go there? Because I've read Shlomo Sand, and he really complicates the matter of what the Ashkenazis are. And so who is this Ashkenazi power bloc that is ruling Israel? How are they different than Jews in America?
Well, I'll be happy to take comments from everybody about this, but from my perspective as a scholar, this is rooted again in the nationalism of the 19th century. And
Are you talking about Zionism now?
Yes, Zionism is rooted in the nationalism of the 19th century. And in the breakup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was a polyglot of languages and peoples and ethnicities and religions, into a concept of single nations that are formed by putatively single peoples that speak single languages, and that might even be discussed as single races. And in the 19th century, that racial discourse was accepted, right? That was true, and that was a reality, that race existed. And I think now, as I teach my students, race exists for sure, but it's obviously a fiction, because genetically, biologically speaking, race is an insignificant and absolutely irrelevant sort of way of thinking about humanity, which shares 99% of all of its genetic material among all 7 billion of us. So anyway, that racial imprint is important because Zionism begins in the end of the 19th century. And so you have a minority people across Europe that is subjected to periodic waves of anti-Semitism. And those Jewish people, as reflected in all the histories of Jews that I know that are from that area, then included a number of responses. A lot of our ancestors were participants in various sorts of left-wing movements that sought to expand democracy, create a human rights situation where there was equality for everyone, or were struggling for economic equality under something called socialism, or whatever. But all of my family, I'm named for Uncle Laszlo, the Trotskyist, right? So, that's something that in all Jewish families I know of, that was one of the responses to anti-Semitism. Another response was this concept that, like all the other peoples in Europe, the Jews were also a national group, and they should have a national territory, which is the center of their state. And I was just in Hungary this summer, which is where Theodor Herzl came from. He was the founder of the Zionist movement. He came from the eastern side of the city, Pest, of which Budapest is composed, half of. And then he goes to Vienna. So he goes from Pest, which is like about 60% Jewish at the end of the 19th century, and he goes to Vienna, which is the hotbed of all these different nationalisms. And Hungary is an archetype of the idea of one nation, one language, one people. And it's astonishing how similar Zionism is to Hungarian nationalism. It's really took me aback in so many ways. And also, it's tied to what used to be called irredentism, right? Which is the concept that we need more territory than we currently have. So Hungarian nationalism is an irredentist nationalism. If you talk to Hungarian nationalists, they have a map that includes parts of Romania and parts of Slovakia and parts of all these different countries that they say should be part of Hungary. And Zionism has always been an irredentism, saying we deserve this huge territory, right? And if we only get part of it, well, that's just part of the plan because we're going to get the rest of it at some point too. So it's always been a sort of expansive territorial notion, always, right? So while the Jewish people in that situation in the 19th century, only part of their response was Zionism, historically, the terrors of the Holocaust, right, shape a situation where Zionism becomes a hegemonic, sort of, or dominant response. And, if you were to talk to Jewish people across the United States today, our Jewish identity is seriously distorted. because of the losses of the Holocaust, really. So much Jewish culture was lost because it was oral. And then this is, again, something I've learned from Lynn. And also something I learned from my own grandmother, who had all these interesting beliefs that you would never learn in a synagogue, right? And so for contemporary American Jewry today, there's, sort of Woody Allen, Bagels and Lox Judaism, and then there's the Holocaust, and there's Israel. And so because of the destruction wreaked by the Holocaust, this is my own analysis, Zionism and Israel become to take a much larger place in how American Jews conceptualize themselves as Jews than would have been the case before the Holocaust, which is all the stuff that I'm reading about, these vast variety of responses to Jewish identity, modern Jewish identity in the United States that existed before the Second World War. So it's a long-winded answer. We have to sort of unwind this tightly woven fabric that Zionism has sort of put into its relationship with Zionism and understand the historical roots of Zionism itself, how Zionism came to become so dominant in American Judaism, right? And what else has there been? What other responses have there been, right? And for me, you go into any, synagogue in this country, and on the bima, the platform where the ark is, where the Torahs are, there's an American flag and there's an Israeli flag. Every single synagogue in this country I've ever found, except for Nahalat Shalom. Except for Nahalat Shalom, right? That's the first one I was ever in, and that's why I could go in there, right? Just because of that. So.
And also,
okay, all right. Yeah.
Well, just a comment about this tipping point, which hopefully is in some respects happening, and that the fear that it would create sort of rampant anti-Semitism. I think it's everybody's responsible here to make sure that doesn't happen. That we need to be the people that come to these conferences, and friends of ours who didn't, we need to be the ones to make sure that that doesn't happen, to speak out against it, because we are participants in this tipping point, and we need to be able to help guide it to those who may be uninitiated. It's our responsibility.
But don't you think we should actually, in our movement here in the United States, confront the Jewish diaspora, the Jews, just as you point out, that are through their synagogues, plugged in, organized, through the Jewish Federation, through AIPAC. That is the key to the support of Israel and the crimes that Israel is committing. Shouldn't the Jewish diaspora be confronted?
Yes, and that's why JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, represents a really good alternative of people as
it's great.
The partnerships in the Christian community.
But shouldn't even us Gentiles
yes,
of course, talk to the Jews?
Yes.
But I live in a city where Christian Zionism is so active. Haiti has a church with 10,000 people. He raises $100 million a year. $100 million a year. We have his students at the University of Incarnate Word who wanted to bring in a Holocaust survivor. They wanted to start their little organization, and only because my friend, Sister Martha.
Start with Hayo Mayer as a Holocaust survivor. He's your first guy.
Yeah.
Hayo Mayer.
But the thing is, what I'm talking about is an answer to what we have to stop Christian Zionism also.
I'm not Jewish, and I come from a space where I do feel like we're responsible, the other 98% of us. And I think that it's really irresponsible to take a group of people who are probably the most affected by this and say, it's your fault. The Jewish community is the key is who's going to change this in our country, and we really have to change them. I feel like what we need to do is learn how to not be silent. How when Netanyahu gets up there and he's speaking to all of America, he's not just speaking to Jewish Americans. He's saying, you guys, you're basically, when you insult Israel, you're insulting Jews, and he does that. And what do? We go, wow, I really shouldn't criticize Israel. And you know what? It's like we can go, actually, no, we can criticize Israel because the idea, what they repeat is that they share our values. Well, actually, we are not an ethnic nationalist state, which is what Zionism is. We're a civic nationalist state.
We do not share their values.
And that's a very, very basic difference. And that's what makes America, to me, so great, is that we are all, the law makes us equal. The law does not make people equal there by design, because it's an ethnic nationalist state. So we have to say, wait, these are our values, and we don't want to support this, because without that 98%, believe me, that would not be going on over there. That's very much American colonial system. And it's not fair just to blame. And what we need to do is go, well, as Americans, we're going to join our people who think like we do, many, many, many who are Jewish, and say, we are speaking in one voice. You can't own the Jewish voice, you can't own the, white people's voice, because we're very. So create a peace movement that's unified and say, we're speaking in one voice, and we're owning this.
Yeah. Franz Schimmel, I'm a Lutheran minister from Weatherford, Texas. I'd say in regard to your remarks, I have kind of the same fear that there could be a rise of anti-Semitism, but I think present and already preceding that, what I confront in the Dallas-Fort Worth area metroplex is Islamophobia. And that is already, that's not even like waiting to arrive. I mean, that is like fully present, very powerful, and included in lots of, I live in a town of about 30,000, mostly Southern Baptists. And it's almost Christian Zionism and Islamophobia are like built into the life and theology of the Christian people there, and it is really, it's a great difficulty. It's a bad spirituality, and it harms all of us, I think.
I am an American Jew, and I think that I really love what I'm hearing here of people coming together, that it's not just a Jewish issue to confront my fellow Jews, which I find such a strong need to do, but the most frustrating thing I've ever tried to do in my life, and I definitely won't bore you with the details. But in any movement that I've ever seen be successful, there comes a common language and a common verbiage. And when I do try and confront the Jewish diaspora, that's what comes back at me. A common language, not necessarily based on fact or truth, but it's there and it hits me in the face. And as I sit here listening to you all, it's hit me for the first time that that's what this movement needs. We need a common verbiage, something that is right at our fingertips, that makes sense, that we can come back at people with. And I think that might be a chore, not a chore, but a goal, a challenge for those of us who are fighting for human rights in Palestine, is to develop a common language. Not that we all have to think exactly the same, but we need to have something to confront some of the language that comes from.
But human rights is that language.
Yeah, that is the language.
I agree, but I'm speaking more specifically.
Yeah.
Very specific. I'd love to see workshops specifically on confronting some of what we hear and how to
From the
get back
myths,
to
you
that.
mean, like the
And
Shara
there was
values
someone
myths.
wonderful from Sabeel. Who was it on one of the tapes that we saw from our last delegation? One of the Sabeel people who spoke to that, a woman who had a wonderful way of, here's how you can go out and make presentations and do it in a positive way, and when someone says this, you can.
Well, I'd like to know what Christian people confront when they do this. I know what I confront, and it really is hurtful. It's terrible to be called an anti-Semite when you're a Jew, and you have the kind of family history that I have and other stuff. It's really it's terrible. I mean, and of course it gets much worse, as Lynn will tell you. I mean, to the death threats and stuff like that. But and when you're publicly excoriated, like I was last month in the link, Jewish link of New Mexico. It's just, and they go for the throat, they go for the jugular. I get asked by people who don't know me and don't know my family, what does your mother think about this? It's like no, it's not funny, because my mother's deceased, and actually I fought with my mother about this. So it's not your business. What? I mean, how can people come at me with that sort of? It's so hurtful. It's so hurtful. But so then those workshops that I think you're right that we need to get deeply into that. What is the hurt coming from those people that they would direct such derision, such really terrible things, and someone they don't even know because they have a different political opinion? Why do they think they can police what is acceptable opinion and the Jewish community of the United States? What gives them the right to do that and to do so in such a denigrating way? It's horrifying.
I have a question.
And Mark.
Mark is over there.
Oh, Mark, yeah. Oh, yeah, Mark, you've been having your hand up forever.
She also.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, you know, you sort of brought me back to the comment I wanted to make.
Could you introduce yourself?
Mark Raven, and I'm a Jewish guy who's been involved with Sabeel.
Jewish guy.
Sabeel kind of, if Lynn sort of helped put you back together, Sabeel sort of helped put me back together. Rabbi, priest, doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm back to what you were saying about your ancestors, your imagined conversation with your ancestors. So would say, well, how about the Holocaust? And that, I think one of the more important things that we learned from Nico is that he challenges the myth of Jewish, not Israeli, but Jewish, well, he's talking about Israeli. I think it's a myth of Jewish vulnerability.
Jewish what?
Vulnerability. That we are about to be destroyed. Now, as a Jew, I mean, we were, Jewish people, we were all raised on that, right? Absolutely. I was raised, I had two mortal enemies. One was the Germans, who, because of what they did to us, and the other was the Arabs, because what they would do to us if we didn't have Israel. But the fact is that Zionism arose before the Holocaust, and that the plans to, quote, relocate the Arabs of Palestine were being made by Ben-Gurion and his group back in the 30s. Before Hitler. So that's, if we want to talk about what Zionism, one important component of Zionism, as we see it today anyway, is that it depends on the myth of Jewish vulnerability, and we see Netanyahu in his antics that he's doing the same thing. Now, it makes me wonder when we're talking about the Christian-Jewish thing. I mean, I feel really strongly, and I'll talk about this tomorrow, that this is, I'm not quite sure this is the same thing Lynn is saying, and I don't think we totally agree on this. I don't think this is an interfaith issue. You know, and I think the Christians get confused about that. And, well, if this is Israel, then it's the Jewish statements about the Jews, like all of that equation that we have to confront. That means that whatever I do about Israel or whatever I say about Palestinian human rights, somehow it has to be involved with my relationship with the Jewish people or with my Jewish friends or family members or whatever. And so I think it's another distinction that we need to make. In the interfaith industry, quote, in this country, for Christians, is all about penitence and about fixing penitence, about fixing, you know, what we did, what Christians did to the Jewish people. And that's powerful and it has to go on. But the human rights issue with Palestine has to be completely separated off from that. Now that's easy to say, but it's hard to do. And I think that's what really is confronting the non-Jewish community in this country, is being able to, Christian terms, pick up that cross because you're going to be called names. The fear, and I just realized this, it's possible that the fear that everyone has, non-Jews have, about effectively confronting the myth of Israeli vulnerability. Obviously. Maybe it has to do with American fear of smashing that myth that we have. Because then who's the enemy? If we're not vulnerable, why do we have to go and wage all these wars and hate, you know, most of the rest of the world if we're not vulnerable? We have to confront that on ourselves. Nobody wants to be vulnerable.
It's because they have oil.
Sally, you wanted to say something.
Oh, I almost forgot the question. I was raised Catholic, and in that day, I was not allowed to read the Bible very much, or at least because we didn't understand it, so somebody had to explain it. They're smart enough that we're used to it. Right. But, so from what little I understand about it, and then I lost interest, so I didn't pursue it. So what little I understand is the tragedy of what the Jewish religious people have had to endure throughout history. I have a problem trying to wrap myself around the idea that they suffered a lot, and now they're doing the same thing to other people. And so I don't know, does anybody have any thoughts about it? I've been listening to the definition of Zionism and this and that and the other, but I still can't quite figure out.
Just because people have been a victim doesn't mean they're a hero, right? People who have been victimized are not then, by turn, heroic in some sense.
Or innocent to analysis.
Right, exactly. I mean, the wife, the child that's beaten by his father goes on to become a child abuser in turn. I mean, the idea that simply by the fact of oppression, long-term oppression, horrendous oppression, you are somehow ennobled and become able to see the rights of all people. As they say in Spanish, sería lindo. It would be nice. But it's not necessarily true. All the Holocaust people in my family hated each other, and they could not stand to be around each other, and they were really mean to each other because they all reminded each other of stuff that they didn't want to think about. And so, I mean, we have to, first of all, sort of, that's another mythology, that oppression ennobles people, and that therefore, by being a victim, you know, you are somehow in a superior moral position. Especially when you're victimizing someone else, right? And that's got to be, the plug's got to be yanked on that one.
Well, I think the plug is, I mean, most of us understand, I think, that if a child who was raised with sexual abuse or other, you know, they're going to probably grow up to be very troubled, angry, dysfunctional people. So that, I think that's the given. We know that. And so, yes, there are people who have come out of that, and those are the people that are activated here. I mean, I don't know if we're all that abused, but nevertheless, I mean, I think the understanding is, yeah, you're gonna subject other people to horrible things. What does that do to you? Does that make, you know, so let's work our way out of that. I think that's what we have to.
That in so many ways is the value of the modern American culture. There's a whole television industry working on the victimatology thing. It's like 7 hours a day. Let's talk about how you were a victim. You were a victim. I mean, we're married to that for some reason. And I might say that the other party in the United States, to which I do not belong, is using it. You are a victim. We're victims. We've got to be careful. Iran, I mean, it's a scare tactic.
Could we get this point over here?
Hi, my name is Sandra Akkad, and I am a Muslim American Palestinian, and I am so impressed with all your opinions and your awakening, if I may. It's just, in terms of being a Palestinian, we've recognized everything you've said. The impact, though, coming from yourselves, whether you be Christian or Jew, is so much more powerful and is so much more pertinent, and it's imperative that your voice needs to get out there. There's so many points that, as you're speaking, I want to make, but in terms of American Jewry, from the Palestinian perspective, the strength of Israel is the American Jewry. Their strength, their resolve comes from the United States. As a Palestinian, I feel a lot more Jewish sympathizers than I do from a lot of American Jewry, such as the AIPAC people and supporters. Israel is a perpetuation, it's a manifestation of Zionism. There's no two ways about it. I don't see Israel and Judaism as one and the same. And no one that knows the conflict would see it as well. It's interesting that you bring this up now. This is something that we recognized several decades ago. But even though it's late in coming, I'm glad to hear it. I just want it to be much more magnified. I mean, you're amazing, Les. Many of you, I mean, everything that you said, it just touches the heart and is really pivotal to the conflict. But the source is emanating, and no doubt it's the churches, not all, obviously. It's the synagogues, not all. We have Rabbi Gottlieb here. That's where the aim should be, really. And each and every one of you should aim to their denomination, whether it be a synagogue, whether it be a church. That's how the voice has to get out. Because otherwise, talking to the choir is wonderful, but from a Palestinian perspective, it's late in coming, and the sooner you all get out there, the sooner it makes it better. And the notion of victimization is so pivotal.
Because when I speak as a Palestinian, and I'm like, wait a minute, who's the victim here? You know, you'd be surprised. But to be honest, the most pivotal thing that I've noticed, it's not the Jew as much as it is the typical American. Because the American is misled. The American has bought into this whole propaganda, all these misconceptions. I mean, and they're sold by it. The Christian Zionists, I mean, ultimately, they believe it. Obviously, there's hidden agendas too, because they're working on different levels. You have to know the depth of where they're coming from. But when I see all these layers, you know, and all of you have just gotten bound to the pivotal point, it's like there is a distinction between Israel and Jews. And yes, anti-Semitism will be on the rise. Because luckily, more people are distinguishing the fact that, although I don't wish that to happen, but more people are seeing the difference that Israel truly is the oppressor, and it's going to backlash on the Jews. And that's why it's so important for Jews to speak up and to make this distinction. Otherwise, and Palestinians can speak, and I speak a lot, and there's many Palestinians that do, and they're very credible, obviously. But truly, when it comes from a Christian or from a Jew, it's much more impactful, especially in the United States. So you need to tackle the churches and the synagogues. If you get to those places, everything else will fall into place. So I commend every one of you, and God bless every one of you, and keep it up. Thank you.
We're done.